All right, everybody, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today, I'm going to be focusing on Mars in Capricorn. And the last video I did was about Pluto leaving Capricorn, going into Aquarius. And I have to say that I got quite a few. I'm not used to getting over 1,000 views on my videos. Sometimes I record videos that get barely any views at all. So I'd also gained a whole bunch of subscribers. Well, I mean, at least I've got a pretty modest little channel here, so it feels like a significant bump, a little boost, the amount of views and subscribers I got since the last video. Although now I'm a little bit maybe self-conscious that I've got a new audience or new people watching, and whatever. We'll just see what happens. It so anyways, the thing about Pluto going into Aquarius is now we've got Mars in Capricorn, and pretty soon Mercury is going to be going to Capricorn. And around the time that Pluto goes into Aquarius, we're also going to be getting Venus into Capricorn, and then eventually Venus is going to catch up to Mars. We're going to have a Mars and Venus conjunction, and this is going to be an interesting one, particularly because, I mean, the reason why my last video was such a big deal was that Pluto, being one of the farthest out planets, takes a long time to go through one sign in another, and we have been dealing with Pluto and Capricorn ever since basically the Barack Obama era started. So it's an easy way to think about these kind of generational eras in terms of American presidents, that all the way through Obama, Trump, and now Biden, we've had this Pluto in Capricorn with a bit of a taste of the short little taste preview of Pluto in Aquarius last year. But now we're going to have Pluto in Aquarius for good, and that means that Capricorn is going to feel very different without Pluto being there, right? And I think there's also something to be said about Mars in Capricorn, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, meaning it's in particularly good dignity, and we're going to have this Mars-Venus conjunction coming up, and Venus is in just average dignity. It's not necessarily good or bad, but because, you've got Mars in good dignity and then being influenced by Venus and Mercury, it's sort of like, I kind of see this as a kind of like a little procession, like a little parade, kind of seeing Pluto out the door and kind of cleaning up after whatever kind of mess that Pluto has left or whatever. Just kind of like wrapping up all this Capricorn business, before, as we move into this cycle of Pluto and Aquarius. But however, this is all going to happen more with all this stuff about Mars and Venus and stuff like that. It's going to be more in the beginning of February, and so that's looking a bit ahead. Right now, at the time I'm making this video, Mars is still in the early degrees of Capricorn, and Venus is still in Sagittarius. Mercury is not in Capricorn yet, and Mars is making a sextile to Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn. Mars is making a trine to Jupiter, which is also recently stationed direct. I'm not going to be talking about that so much in this video, but the direct Jupiter may be an influence on why my astrology channel has had such an increase in views all of a sudden. I don't know. But continuing on here, there's something that another thing to do with Pluto's ingress into Aquarius is that Pluto in recent years has been hanging around the last decan, the third decan of Capricorn, the last degrees of Capricorn, and that has been squaring the nodes of the moon, right? And for those of you who are not aware, the nodes of the moon indicate where we have eclipses, right? And last year in springtime, we had a solar eclipse in Aries. And then the eclipses are a little bit awkward because they do this like they did this kind of like wiggle thing where we had our first Aries eclipse, and then during Scorpio season we had our last lunar eclipse in Taurus along the the Scorpio Taurus axis. And unfortunately, during the eclipse, the lunar eclipse with Taurus, that's when all that Israel Palestine stuff kicked off, and it's still obviously going on right now. Um, and that sets us up so that we're done with eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus, and now we're going to be having another solar eclipse in Aries, and this time the solar eclipse in Aries is going to be a total solar eclipse that will have visibility in the United States along the East Coast. Although, however, I'm Canadian and I live in the West Coast, so it won't be so visible for me. There is something interesting about this in terms that we're going to have an election. Well, not we're going to have an election. There's an American election going to happen. And there was a solar eclipse in Leo around the time that Trump first got elected, or leading up to that. Actually, I guess it was. Hold on. I guess that was. I'm just trying to put this together in my mind when that eclipse happened and when the election was. I'm thinking it was probably more like after the election of Trump, when his inauguration year, if I'm thinking correctly, right? Anyways, it was in 2017, summer 2017. There was a solar eclipse in Leo that was visible from where I lived. That was sort of around the time when I was first getting into learning about astrology. So I'm still pretty new at this. So now we're going to be having this total solar eclipse in Aries, and this is Mars is the ruler of Aries. So when we're talking about Mars in Capricorn, the business of the solar eclipse in Aries is connected to Mars in Capricorn. And like I was saying, last year, Pluto was squaring the nodes. And this whole thing about squaring the nodes is its own kind of condition, right? There's this whole thing called the bending, right? That there's this kind of like, the nodes themselves are I consider the nodes to be pretty sensitive areas in a chart, and that when a planet or the moon is on the nodes, it's a kind of a sensitive position to be in. And also when a planet is squaring the nodes, it's also, and there's also like, it can also have to do with things like letting go or building up, depending on from what angle they're being. In this case, the Capricorn, I believe, is a self-bending, so it's more about a kind of a letting go process, right? Yeah, I mean, last year I recorded a video about the solar eclipse in Aries, and I was talking about it in terms of being like a big kind of like consciousness shift or something like this, right? And I also should say that for one thing, I'm Scorpio rising, and it's a sixth house thing for me, so there's a health association. Um, The other thing I suppose I should say, I mean, I've got a bunch of new viewers or whatever, who may not know me. I'll just talk about this really briefly, is that, what was it? Yeah, I mean, at one point in time, I was having some sort of mental health concern, although I was also involved in the community around spiritual emergence or spiritual emergency, where there's something going on where there's a certain group of people out there who are not very keen on the diagnostic, the DSM, the mental health system of diagnosis, or at least they see there's a certain spiritual dimension in their experiences. And I was involved in that for a while. It would be a bit much to get into. I met, back in 2011, it all sort of happened for me around the time when Uranus went into Aries and Neptune went into Pisces. I sort of had this psychotic breakdown kind of thing, but there's a certain spiritual dimension in it as well. I got mixed up in the psych system for a while, and I think it's too. I don't want to make it completely a dichotomy between things like physical health and some kind of spiritual thing. Like, maybe there could be a physical biological component as well. I managed to get out of the mental health system. I managed to get off the medications. I have, my views around the use of psychiatric medications may be different from those of a lot of other people, and I'm not apologetic about it. I have, I have my own point of view, and I'm, if you don't like it, if that really puts you off, feel free to unsubscribe, or feel free not to watch my videos. I don't care. More recently, though, after this whole COVID pandemic thing happened, I ended up having a health crisis of a different variety to do with autoimmune issues, and it was actually this was back in 2021. It was actually pretty serious, and I've been, since then, recovering my health, and I'm feeling a lot better, doing a lot better now, but I have to take some sort of medication. I'm not going to get into all those details, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is that aside from just me personally being a sixth house, the Aries and the eclipses and all this being a sixth house thing to do with health, there is also Chiron, the wounded healer, right? Which is a symbol of healing. And one of the things is that I've also noticed that a lot of the astrologers that I follow tend to stick to the planets, using Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, the outer planets, but, usually omitting these asteroids and not, maybe because it would just take too much time or whatever to go into all these different asteroid things. And what I find, though, is that for some reason I find Chiron to be an interesting one to use in a chart if I'm doing natal chart readings, because it usually seems to be, there usually is something significant around Chiron, the wounded healer, and also just the archetype of the wounded healer has always been something that kind of resonated for me a bit. I mean, I don't really make any pretense to my ability to be a healer or something like that, but there's the process of illness and health and healing, and around, especially with these eclipse cycles, sort of setting that off. And around this time, I decided to record a video, and I was kind of going into this idea of like a kind of like archetypal healing process or whatever, because I have to admit that this whole thing about like spiritual emergency and psychosis and stuff like that, like, I'm pretty stable. I've been able to live without medication and stay out of the hospital for anything psychiatry related, but I still have stuff going on. And there's this also, it's kind of funny because when it's been a sensitive topic for me in terms of where this connects with, let's say, the new age scene, or the on the internet, the community of all these people that are into spirituality and stuff like that. And one of the, like, because I went through a bunch of stuff and was told basically that I was crazy, or that anything that I experienced that was not what normal people experience was a sign that I was ill and all this kind of stuff. And I basically ended up learning to be very selective of who I talked to about what. Basically because I didn't, there's certain things that I, like, I could recognize certain things going on and saying, if you were to tell somebody about this, it sounds kind of crazy, and they might get the wrong idea and try to lock me up in the hospital again. And my, regardless of what anybody else thinks about this, my number one goal is for that not to happen, right? And so there's something about Pluto that has to do with what is like hidden, what is kept secret, what is like the underworld and stuff like this. Um, but there's also this thing about what I realize is that when you're doing a YouTube channel, doing something that's very public, that there's, I think it's like I'm recording this video, and I don't have a written out essay or like a speech prepared or something. I'm just kind of riffing it freestyle, right? And I don't but I have a kind of a sense of there being my own private experience, which I will keep private, and trying to select something. There feels like there's some need, at least, to, you know, bring out what is going on inside me and express it to the world. Although I'm also hyper cautious about doing that. The funny thing about it is that I don't have a lot of interaction with the New Age or the spiritual community or this whatever at large, but there are certain people who are, you would, you know, identify with that kind of, like, you know, California energy worker kind of stuff, that if you listen to what some of these people say, like, it's way, way, way crazier than anything that I would talk. You know, like, I could, like, so there's this kind of thing of, like, in a certain context, in a certain milieu, there are people who are, you know, who see themselves as, like, visionary healers or clairvoyants or all this kind of stuff, and the stuff they talk about sounds like it's totally, you know, in another planet, you know, or you know, like, completely off the wall. And what's come about for me anyways is that I'm not there are certain people that I've met in this kind of, like, convergence between people who have gone over their mental health stuff and gotten more into the New Age, and now they, like, identify as being, like, clairvoyants or whatever, and they'll maybe have these channels that are really popular and really successful and all this kind of stuff. And on the other hand, I kind of feel like I have to live a life of being, well, I mean, I don't feel as confident of just putting my whole inner process just out for public consumption, first of all. And although what I'm doing, it kind of necessitates this process of gradually kind of working on this thing and trying to work out what it is that I could say or what I should say or whatever. And the whole thing about the last video, about what I was doing, where I was talking about being more apolitical, that is just maybe like the first step of trying to communicate something about what's coming up through my own healing process and all that. And there is maybe a bit of a political dimension, and it's like, it's tricky for me to navigate because I'm come from a left-wing oriented family, right? And I don't, it's just that there's a sort of business like what's come up, the aftermath of all the Jordan Peterson kind of stuff, that I'm not like, where there's this kind of tendency to say that, like, you are going, like, this whole thing about, like, trans issues and gender essentialism and stuff like that, basically, that I don't really want to be put into a camp where I'm, like, anti-trans or anti-queer people or anti-this or anti-that, you know, or I don't want to, but there's something about the traditionalism that usually goes with yoga or whatever, different forms of spirituality, that, you know, I mean, whatever, I don't know, maybe this is getting off track, but it does relate to this sort of thing about when you're talking about Mars, and, the polarities between Mars and Venus and but you don't have to. I mean, it's just I kind of want to avoid this whole thing because it's like something to I get bogged down in this part of the conversation, and then I forget about whatever it is I actually have to say about the astrology, right? But there's some basic kind of thing going on where, although I grew up with a lot of kind of left-wing oriented friends and in a left-wing oriented family, I went through this whole thing, a mental health crisis. Like I said, it was very isolating, and then it was confusing because there'd be friends that I used to be friends with that I used to think of as being like, I don't know, queer kids, or these are probably the kind. What do you think of when you think of leftists? You think of like people with like colored hair and piercings and tattoos that go to punk rock shows or something, and there'd be people like this that I was like that I would associate my growing up, and this is how I'm cultured and stuff like that. And then I go through this period of time of being really isolated and stuff like this, and then if I out of the blue, I'll be talking to one of these friends on the internet, or they're like, oh, okay, some old friend is checking in, somebody who I might assume might think this way or that way, and the person's like, oh yeah, feminism sucks, man. Nobody's feminist, and I'm like, I don't know, like, how am I, like, and then what I have to deal with is my family at home, who have, I don't want to turn my astrology channel into just an open war on my family that I live with either, right? But the whole thing is like, it's a confusing time because the people that I used to be friends with, that I used to like identify as my social group, who the hell even knows what they think anymore? I don't. And when I do talk to them, it's kind of confusing. And then so I'm just kind of trying to figure it out or whatever. I don't know if I say if I go and I'm having my own internal process and stuff like that, and I say the wrong thing on the internet, then everybody's going to bring out the torches and pitchforks or something like that, right? But there's also this whole thing, like I said as well, I mean, Chiron, there's this whole thing about like living with my family, Chiron and Aries, and whether this has to do with the healing process, does this have to do with being independent, right? And this is the whole thing also about independence, is that when somebody talks to you, somebody says something like healing around independence and personal autonomy, and like, what does that mean? What do you think of? Do you think of a person needs to heal their relationship with their family by asserting some independence, by getting their own place, by moving out, or something like that? Or there's also this thing, though, that is like, your independence is always going to be in relation to something else, right? And there's this whole thing, I mean, it could also, in another context, healing, like the process of healing and independence could be like somebody was working in an environment that was like a toxic work environment. And that the person just had to like separate from this work environment, get out of there, and sort of establish their own life that's independent from this work environment, right? And there's this other kind of thing about like if you think about the identities that we build up as adolescents, right? Because I was just mentioning, people I might have been friends with when I was teenagers or something like that. And like, there's this whole thing that happens when young people are or rather than just being a identity in the family, they're getting out there and they're having their friends, and they're building an identity in a community of peers, right? And something about this is like, I feel like there's a lot of people, probably a lot of millennials or whatever, that that we're like, I'm in my 30s now, right? But like, this whole thing about like, what's your identity? Is your identity like based on the situation that was happening when you're a teenager, and then that gives you some sort of a blueprint of who you are? the other thing that is important to, I mean, I don't know if I'm going all over the place here, but with Aries, I made a video recently where I was talking about the eclipses in Aries and Libra, and I was basically riffing off this idea of this North Node in Aries as being a drive towards independence, right? That may even be a bit out of proportion or something like that, right? But then I started, like, there's this whole thing about the 12-letter alphabet, and one of the things I'm trying to do is I have, there's a lot of modern astrology books where they basically conflate, they get the meaning for Aries from the first house, saying that the first house is all about self, and the seventh house is all about other, so Aries is self, Libra is other, and so this whole thing about being independent, is that really just a first house association? But anyways, there is Mars and Aries and springtime, and Mars has to do with cutting, separating. And also fire. Fire itself, like if you think about like the relation between different elements like water and earth, like if you have earth, a dry earth, and you put water on it, it has the effect of making it muddy, right? Or making it kind of mushy, right? If you have the idea of like fire and you add air, it makes the fire hotter. If you have fire and earth, it lights the earth on fire. It's like, so fire as an element itself has this effect of not playing as nice with others as the other elements do. And so, based on the elemental association, as well as the Mars as a ruler for Aries, that this sort of hot, fiery Aries thing has this kind of thing about wanting to individuate, because in relation to others, it has this kind of burning effect that will cause pain and discomfort kind of thing to other people, right? Now the thing about, bringing it back to this Mars in Capricorn transit that we're having right now, Mars is exalted in Capricorn because basically when Mars is in Capricorn, it's a Saturn-ruled Earth sign. So there's this kind of idea that when Mars is in this Capricorn, it's in good dignity, because instead of having all this Marsy energy going towards some sort of selfish, individualistic, self-oriented focus, it is sublimated to the efforts of the group. Or there's also, the thing is, the problem is though, is that this can become very militaristic, right? Because there's something about Saturn and Mars together, which is like, so like if it's almost like boot camp. Like all you Marsy jerks who just, go off, or fight, squabble with each other and all want to do your own thing. We're going to get you together in a rank and file formation, and we're going to discipline you so that, you don't talk back to your higher up. And, and when we say march, you march. When we say fire, you fire. When we say get into the trenches, you get into the trenches. And we operate like a efficient machine, and then we can harness all this Mars energy to actually do something. But, in the context of, war, there's this kind of, what we're talking about is large scale destruction, right? And especially there's this kind of thing that happened that before the Industrial Revolution, before the advances of all this technology, like there was more of there's this kind of thing about like, if you are out just for your own individual self-gratification or your own gains, like, you can't take your with you after you die, right? So it is more noble to work for some greater cause, right? And so, this is still maybe a common sentiment, but, this is the kind of thing that at one point in time, basically was used to manipulate people into joining the army and being more militaristic. Like, what good can you do as just one person? Come join us, a big army, and and then if you die, you're fighting for a greater cause. And all this kind of stuff. And it's like people seeing my life is meaningless. What am I doing here? I need to join. Be all you can be. Join the Navy. And I have to say that I know I was raised as my dad he did train in the reserve forces in the army, and I do have basically my grandparents were in the military and all this kind of stuff, but I was basically raised with the attitude of being anti-war and anti-violence, and I don't, in terms of being apolitical, one of the things is that I think in terms of the current wars and conflicts going on right now, I don't think it's kind of obvious who the underdogs are. And there's often a kind of an inclination to be like, hey, yeah, you see, this is not very fair, that this is not exact, and that to have, but like the thing is, aside from being, what I'm trying to say about being for one thing about being apolitical in this context is like, it's one thing to be like, oh, look, everybody, I have the right opinion, this is what everybody should think, listen to me. But like, aside from being like a loud mouth, just be thinking you are right about everything, and there can be all these people dying and all this terrible stuff, but you can sit there in a kind of self-righteous, if everybody just listened to me, everything would be better because I know it. I know all the answers, right? It's like, and like, what exactly are you doing? If you're so smart, what are you doing to make it better exactly, right? It's sort of like, oh yeah, you're just being some conceited jerk or whatever who likes to think that they know it all, right? When if we really, do you think we'd have enough of these people who know it all that we could actually improve things and we wouldn't have this problem? But apparently not, right? Because and if you do know it all, then what are you doing just talking about it? Why don't you do something to change it, right? Maybe you'll run into some of the you won't seem so smart after, I don't know. I don't want to get into all that stuff right now. I don't know if I'm getting off track here, right? But what I'm trying to say is that there's this, to go back to this sort of another thing about Chiron in Aries transiting the North Node, and this is going to be squared by its ruler Mars in Capricorn, which is exalted. It's going to be squared by Mercury and Venus as well. And we're going to have a total eclipse in Aries in an American election year. This is a pretty, loaded transit, if you ask me, right? There's what I was saying, too, there's this question about independence, right? Which independence could be, in a certain context, being independent from your family, right? But, there's another context that is, this whole thing about, soldiers in an army going to war or something like that is that you can see oh well yeah I'm going to be independent from my family and I'm going to sign up for the military and join the Marines and then I will be a real man, I will be no, you're not really that independent if you're in the army. You have this kind of thing where you're you have somebody, you have to be on call. If the military wants you to be somewhere, you have to go there, or else you're insubordinate, you're AWOL, right? And yet, but if you have a military career and you're a then you're a real independent person. You're not really independent, are you? You're not. You just do what you're told in a kind of a rank and file military system. So that's not independence, is it? And this whole thing about if you're this whole, I don't want to get into it's kind of a trite thing to go into John Lennon mode and imagine if there were no borders and no countries and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know, I'm not okay. I'm just kind of riffing, freestyle riffing here. Like, but I'm saying that maybe belonging to a nation state that has some sort of like that gives you a story that says fight for this cause, and you'll be fulfilling some greater cause that is like you could, rather than being your own individual effort, join us and fight for our this bigger thing, and you'll be doing God's work or something like that by going killing a bunch of other people who have different belief system than you or something. It's like maybe that's something you want to individuate from as well. It doesn't sound very good to me, right? But I mean, again, like the whole thing is like I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. But I'm saying that the whole idea of independence, about individuating, about like it could like what is it in relation to? Is it being independent in relation to your family? Is it about being independent in relation to your government? Is it being about independent being in relation to a military or police force? Is it about being independent in relation to a economic system, a financial system? Is it about or a religious belief system? There's all sorts of different lines of individuation, ways you can become independent, right? And so, the other thing that I was thinking of basically is the healing, right? So there's the idea of healing around the need to be independent, or healing like maybe during times of sickness and ill health, it's made us dependent on different people or different systems, and maybe healing involves becoming more independent or autonomous in that respect, right? But what's kind of funny about this whole thing with Pluto, like Pluto in Capricorn has been squaring the nodes, and it's going to be making this ingress into Aquarius really soon. And now the three planets Mars, Venus, and Mercury are going to be leading the procession through Capricorn to kind of see Pluto out, and they're going to be making these aspects to Chiron and the nodes where we're going to be having the eclipses. One of the things about this I was thinking about, here, I'll grab it. I read this last year, the first of Goethe's Faust, however you would say it. And I don't know if I'm gonna find the right thing right off the top of my head, but there was one thing, like I made a video last year where I was talking about how I was having this sort of like chest thing about having like in Faust he calls it like clawing at your breast, like there's like your heart center is like feeling like, I don't know if it could actually literally be some physical part, maybe part of my ill health, my healing, right? Or there's some kind of like you're in the whole chakra thing. They usually talk about the solar plexus and the heart, right? There being two different chakras. The heart being obviously you're doing emotions and all this kind of stuff, but your solar plexus being like your personal will, right? And there's a sort of thing about this sort of like this pain of clawing about and in Faust there's this line that's like, to be done with the ancestral rubbish and this house that's filled with all this old, knickknacks and dust and cobwebs and mold, and I just to go into the open field and to start fresh on your own, right? And this kind of like this drive to be independent, right? But the thing is, one thing that I realized, like looking back, after finishing reading, I also have the second one, which I haven't read yet, but maybe I'll do that this year. I don't know. The whole conversation is Faust talking to the devil, basically, whatever. What's his name? Mephistopheles or whatever. Mephistopheles, right? and it's the devil that is saying, go individuate, right? Like it's not God saying that this is the holy way to go. It's the devil poking you with a pitchfork, right? Although there is this whole thing about, Christianity where it's like that Jesus gives you a sword to use against your family, right? Like, so there's this kind of thing. There are these kind of like tensions, I think, a little bit with the Mars and Aries individuating kind of thing. And like there's also this kind of stuff about getting into the archetypes and all this kind of stuff. And like I mean there's this whole there's something about the I might as well finish with this part of it that I first of all, there's some people who are into doing tarot will advise against combining tarot with astrology. Some people who are into astrology will advise against combining astrology with tarot, right? And then there are people, astrologers out there, who use tarot associations in their astrological divination. My basic attitude towards this is, I mean, I'm not going to tell anybody else what to do, but I am still just doing it this way. And I've been using Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot, and my defense of this is that if you use the Thoth Tarot, the astrological associations are explicitly written on the cards. So it would be like, if you use the Tarot de Marseille, it doesn't have these associations just built in. And there's a lot of people who prefer the Tarot de Marseille just to, you pull a card and you don't draw a line from Aries to the Emperor, for example. But if you use the Crowley deck, or if you use the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, even the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is a little bit more subtle about it, but the associations are still there. There is an Aries association with the Emperor. And with that in mind, I have to also admit that I've only started using tarot cards a few years ago. And, like 2019, 2020 is like kind of when I got more into it. I honestly wish I got into using tarot cards when I was younger. Maybe it probably would have saved me a lot of trouble. If maybe it was just not there in my development to be the kind of person who would have their own. Actually, I think I had a tarot deck. I just didn't use it, or there's something about it that I guess maybe I was some stage in my life I was just not drawn to do that, and then at a different period of time I was, right. I guess there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I have to admit, my own learning about the tarot, one of the cards that I really struggled with at the beginning was the Emperor. Because, for a number of reasons, first of all, you've got all these kings, right? And the Emperor, what is the Emperor aside from another king? Like, you pull all these kings, okay, what's an Emperor? Isn't the Emperor just like another glorified king? But no, he's a major arcana, he's a whole different thing, right? And then so there's like the Emperor and the Empress. Is this just like, when you pull the Emperor, is this just the patriarchy? Is this just toxic masculinity? Or is this like what, or like this kind of thing of like this question of like whenever you draw the Emperor, like what's the Emperor coming up for? What's the Emperor? What am I supposed to interpret about? Because I think at one point in time, I think like in the past, with all this stuff that happened with the civil rights movement, with feminism, with all this stuff, and as well as democracy and moving away from the idea of there being like the whole, the Emperor as being like the servant of God or something like that. Like it's a weird, the way I'm kind of would be politically oriented going into this, dealing with an Emperor card in the tarot I wasn't sure about what kind of message it had for me, right? And I also have to say that one thing that's been really helpful has been Alejandro Jodorowsky. This is the guy who did The Holy Mountain. This is the guy who did El Topo. This is the guy that did, well, I don't know, a whole bunch of movies. And he did some comic books too. I will just read his chapter on the Emperor. In particular, in this book, he has these things, this one thing that says, if the Emperor spoke. He has, for each of the major arcana, he has, if the card itself could talk to you and tell you directly what it's about, right? And this, keeping in mind that we've got an exalted Mars in Capricorn, and we've got Chiron, the wounded healer, transiting the north node, and we're going to be having a total solar eclipse in Aries. And so I've been going through this whole process around I'm Scorpio rising, and this is my 6th house, and like I said, I've been having health problems over the years, and I'm going through a healing process, and I'm trying to be selective about what I want to keep some of it private, and this is the Pluto thing, right? Like with the Pluto thing, it's like there is some value, I think, to having some privacy and not just putting your crazy dreams and visions and inner things going on just publicly for public consumption, right? But this area that Pluto has been occupying, Pluto doing with secrets and your own private underworld or whatever, is moving out of the way, and now we're getting Mars and Venus and Mercury all transiting this position. And keeping this in mind, the healing process to do Mars and Aries and Capricorn and the healing process, I will read to you Jodorowsky's If the Emperor Spoke. I am security. I am the very personification of force. When I am speaking inside you, you understand that weakness does not exist. As long as you have not seen me, you will know only insecurity. You will not have the power to make or do anything, or express or resist yourself. You are a victim, but in my presence your fears are over. You will cease to doubt and devalue yourself. No one can force you to do what you do not wish to do. My laws are the laws of the universe in action. When we do not oppose them, they are infinitely peaceful. But when we disobey them, they are terrible. I am capable of unleashing illness, heart attacks, tumors, or cirrhosis inside you. If you do not obey the laws that I have organized, I can destroy, and I have the right to kill. But if you are sick and I am inhabiting you, I will bring you through your pain and suffering, dissolving all obstacles. I am the health concealed within an ailing body. I'll just pause here. This is something, like, I made a video and I decided to make it private and I decided to delete it. And I was kind of like going through this last year in the springtime, and I was too in the midst of it. I just need to go through this stuff and not have it all just as something I'm publicly putting out there. But this is kind of like the archetype that was coming up for me, that I was sick. I had gotten seriously ill just a couple years before, and there was some kind of thing activating in me. I have been getting better. My health problems have been receding, but there is some sort of like awareness that comes from the illness, right? That you're in this thing. Even if you're sick, even if you're not the image of sparkling health or whatever, you're in this thing and you're getting better. And in that process of getting better, you're becoming more aware of something, even if more aware of what the pain is making you aware of, right? and there's some kind of voice coming online that is starting to like, if you want to get better and if you want to heal, this is maybe you should think about doing these things, right? And this is kind of what was going on for me, although it also has to do with like the emperor. Like there's one of the things that I have been coming up for me is that the relation to authority and the emperor as authority, and that being a kind of a difficulty for me going into this. I can't remember where I got this from, but I remember somebody saying that like the root word of authority is author, right? And we think a lot different about authorship than we do about authority. When you think about authority, you think about a cop who's telling you, oh, you did something wrong, we're going to lock you up, or or you got to do this, you got to show to work up on time or whatever, right? Whereas authorship is like, this is a story, who's the one writing the story? Is there some paternal figure that writes the story and says, now Dan does this, now Dan does that, now, or are you the one who gets to decide what direction the story goes in, right? And so this is the whole thing about like, nobody can make you do something you don't want to do. So who's the authority, right? Who's the one making the rules? Who's the one making the choices? Are you really doing what you want to do or not? Or where does that balance of power lie, right? And maybe some people are totally out of line. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that stuff. I'm going to continue reading this. So back again, this is the emperor speaking, the archetype of the emperor. I am invincible. I do not hesitate when it comes to conflict. I wage war. I shall never admit defeat. No one can dethrone me. And so, this is another thing where we've got all this war going on. I don't want to go like, go into full on, masculine warrior. I mean, I still think this kind of sucks. This whole, killing people because your king tells you to or whatever. I don't know. This is my leanings. But anyways, get back into this. I am an axis. I organize everything around my laws. I make it possible for all kinds of order to reign, from the most tender to the most ferocious. When I dwell within you and you meet another emperor, we combine our forces. There is no competition possible, no combats between kings. I am a unique archetype who resides in each of you. When I manifest inside your body, you enjoy complete balance. You are incapable of stumbling. With me, the body is the center of the universe. It is supported by an immense force and is capable of facing anything. I am terribly calm. When I place myself in your mouth and muscles, your words are precise. You do not tremble. Everything in you is pacified, organic processes, thoughts, desires, heart, memory, time, and space. Place me at your center like an inexhaustible spring, as the root of your future soaring flight. Anguish will no longer forbid you from living or realizing yourself. Impotence and laziness will no longer have any grip on your activity. Fear of poverty will no longer oppose your true work. You will be capable of building your prosperity. Emotional storms will not distract you from your work. Pain and illness will not prevent you from feeling your power. Nothing will be able to break your concentration. Neither your intellectual reservations, nor your timidity, nor your identification with the victim role, nor past sufferings, nor poor self-image will prevent you from finding me your emperor. If a toxic education or a system of destructive values have imprinted false laws inside you, sweep them away. Establish your rules, your work system, your action, your laws, I reveal to you. I am there, I appear, and behind me there is an entire army, the sun, the stars, the galaxies. I protect you and urge you to exhort your strength. I am your inner warrior, the one who sees your weaknesses and does not weaken. There you go. So with that in mind, that is what I have to consider in this this transit of planets through the sign of Capricorn, Mars, Venus, and Mercury will all be making their way through Capricorn. They will all be squaring Chiron, the wounded healer, in Aries with the North Node. And then when it comes time to be Aries season, we'll have a total solar eclipse in Aries. And so that's kind of what's on my mind today. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And I don't know, Happy New Year, everybody. Okay, thanks.